Carol. Okay. Let me. Hi. What is your name?
Happy Sabbath. Huh?
What is your name?
My name is Sandy.
Sandy. Nice to meet you. Okay, we'll pass out some more. Well, if you have people come in, you can give them. Okay. All right. Let's have a prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for the Sabbath, and thank you once again we can come and study your word. And we are very fortunate to have a wonderful day. We have a religious freedom that we can study your work, we can worship you. And please be your spirit be with us as we study this lesson. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, so we are studying on the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy is what they call a second law. Deutero is like second law, Deuter. So it's not really a second law, but it's maybe restating the law that the Israelites received in Mount Sinai, and maybe restated and maybe elaborated a little bit more. So at the first chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses was kind of like recounting a history lesson for the Israelites. And then, so we can, on the paper that I passed out is a recount of the 40-year timeline of Exodus. Now, actually, the timeline, most of the book of Exodus and in the book of Numbers mentions about 1.5 years after they left. Okay, after they left Egypt. Okay, the first Passover, the night of the first Passover, and then they left Egypt. Okay, so that now the year one. Okay, the 15th day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar. That is actually around April, middle of April. Okay, so the first month is usually April. Okay, there's a springtime and there's the time of Passover, and so they have that 10 plague where the sons of the king and all the firstborn were killed. So that was a time that the Pharaoh finally allowed them to leave Egypt. And then, so in about 1.5 months, they arrived at Sinai, and then a couple of days later, Moses, I think, went up to the mountain. So Moses actually went up to the mountain 2 times, and 8 times, like, take him 40 days, and then we know the story. So they stay in Mount Sinai. Later, after that, they stay in Mount Sinai, and then God gave Moses the instruction to build the tabernacle, which takes them the rest of the year. So the tabernacle were built on the first day of the first month in year number 2, the year 2. Okay, and so that is so they stay at Mount Sinai area for like a whole year, and then finally they were able to build a tabernacle, and then they stayed there for another 1.5 months, and then so they finally left Sinai in the second month on the 20th day on year 2. That would be equivalent to May of the year, May. Okay, now. And then they take maybe half a year or maybe kind of like another quite a few months for them to arrive at this location called Kadesh Barnea, which is kind of like the staging ground to check out the promised land, the land of Canaan. Let me give you you can give them I have some more. You can pass them. Okay, you can pass it to whoever is coming in. Okay. And then the Bible said that there's they after the spy mission came back, and then they were hesitating as to whether to go in or not, and then because of their lack of faith, God decreed that they will stay in the desert for a total of 40 years. So from the second half of the second year, you add 38 years, you come to year 40. Okay, it's year 40, and then finally they actually returned to Kadesh Barnea at year 40, and then they were having a few more events before they finally arrived at the Seret Valley. That is the end of the 38 years. So by that would be like near the 39 years, the second half of the 39 years. So, and then after that, they ran into the Amorite kings, and then they defeat them. So this is kind of like the timeline of the Exodus, and that is, so Moses, in his recounting of the historical lesson of the past 40 years. Now, we know that if you read carefully the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers, most of this 30 years is not really recorded very much. It's probably covered maybe 1.5 chapters in the book of Numbers, chapter 20 and 21, and the first half of chapter 21. So most of the 38 years, the Bible doesn't have very much to say. So most of the things that happen is in the first 1.5 years until they come up to this Kadesh Barnea. There's the staging ground for them to send out the spies, and then we know the rest of the story. We're happy that Pastor Phil has been preaching about the route to the promised land. So we know a lot of those stories, and so this probably give us a more general idea about how the Exodus, now in archaeology, the question is the main question about Exodus is not whether it happened. Most archaeologists and scholars, they believe it happened. I think the main argument difference of opinion is when it happened and also where it happened. There are like two main theories as to when it happened, whether it's 15th century or the 13th century. As to where it happened, they talk about 3 different routes, including the most commonly traditional route was the southern route, where they take along the coastal area of the Sinai Peninsula, and that's so I don't have a good picture. The picture shows you 3 different routes, and then they talk about the different possibility of each routes. They have to have a lot of biblical studies and try to fit everything together. So we don't really want to talk about where it happened or when it happened, but we know that it did happen. Okay. Now, so this is a like a historical background of the Exodus. So and now when we talk about when we study the book of Exodus and Numbers, we noticed that the Israelite people were fairly disobedient. They complained quite a lot, okay? And then several times they rebel, okay? Okay, when I study the book of Exodus and Numbers, they actually recorded 14 instances of the Israelites' complaints against Moses or rebellion against God, okay? Now, this 14 incidents include the first 2 incidents has to do with Pharaoh's oppression and the Pharaoh pursuit. So when the first 2 incidents was that when the Pharaoh give them more work, they make the bricks without provide them with the straw. So they complained 2 times. And then for 7 times, the complaints was about food and water and just general hardship. Apparently, living in the desert is a very hard life. I can, we can probably understand. But you can give the paper to 2 more people come in. You can. Otherwise, I'll take. Yeah, they have. Yeah. So it's a very hard life for them. Okay, so so 7 times during these 14 times, they were complaining about either there's no water or there's not enough food, or they complain that the food is the same manna that they are getting tired of. So 7 times they complain about lack of food and lack of water. And then there are 5 times, okay? There are 2 times associated with Pharaoh and 7 times associated with food, water, and general hardship. And so there are 5 times that involve active rebellion, in which 2 of the times we will be talking about, okay? That 2 times will be, the first time would be kind of like when they built that idol at the bottom of Mount Sinai, and then the second time is the rebellion is that they rebel against, when the spies come back from Canaan, they tell them about all these fearsome people, so they rebel. They don't want to go in. They don't want to fight. So they are like 2 times associated with Pharaoh, 7 times with food and water, and 5 times involving active rebellions. Okay. Now how does Moses respond to these complaints and rebellion? Now, 4 times Moses redirected the complaints to God. Okay, he was saying that it's better that God will deal with these people, and why does he have to deal with these people? So there was early in his ministry. So he actually rebelled. He redirected the complaints to God, and then one of the last time when they were complaining about lack of water, Moses actually struck the rock twice at the desert of Sin, which is a place called Meribah, meaning quarreling. Okay, but then there are 5 times Moses actually interceded for the Israelites. He was trying to save the people. So we can see that Moses was actually, as he developed this patience dealing with the people. He loved the people so much that he actually interceded for the Israelites 5 times. Okay. So this is like a general, recording of the history of the Israelites during the 40 years. Now, so we are going to maybe put a little bit more time on the 2 incidents that I mentioned, the 2 incidents of rebellion. And actually, Pastor Phil has preached about these incidents already. So we are glad that he have talked a lot. But we can because in the first 3 chapters of Deuteronomy, he actually mentioned these two incidents. So this is kind of like, today we kind of like, we examine these two incidents. Okay, so the first incident is the golden calf incident. The golden calf incident was that when Moses was up at the mountain with God. So he was there for 40 some days, and he delayed coming back down. So the people asked Aaron to create an idol for them to worship. So Aaron went ahead and collect all the gold from the people, and then so he built an altar in front of a golden calf. And then after that, they have a celebration, it's festival. So while they are having a festival, Moses was up there, okay? Moses was up there talking to God. And then so God knows what is going on. So God, the Bible said that God's anger was aroused. And he was actually threatening to destroy the people. So immediately, Moses interceded for the Israelites. And then how did Moses intercede for the Israelites? Do you remember? What did Moses try to tell God? Well, he reminded God of something. He reminded God about, basically, he reminded God about his character and his reputation. Okay, we talk about God as merciful, and so he remind God that his character and his reputation is in play. If he destroyed his people, then what would the Egyptian people say? He was telling them the Egyptian people will laugh at the Israelites, that God take them out for bad motives, so that they can destroy them in the wilderness. So, but then after Moses interceded with God, so God relented, so he did not do as he threatened to do. So but then Moses went down to the mountain. He met Joshua, and then what happened? Moses himself became very angry too. Okay, and what did he do? What did Moses do when he get angry at the people? He was carrying the tablets, right? What did he do with the tablets? He broke it, threw it at them, broke it. And then follow that he commanded the Levites to kill about 3,000 people that day, okay? So, but then later, during this same incident, Moses made atonement for the people's sin. So a second time during the same event, he interceded for the people a second time, and he asked God to forgive the sins. And he said, if not, please blot me out of the book you have written. And then later, the people, the people were struck with a plague, and maybe more people die. So this is the one of the rebellion that Moses recall. That was at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Okay, the second rebellion, that only is the second of 5 rebellions, was at the place named called Kadesh Barnea. Okay, Kadesh Barnea, that is about what? Maybe about 1.5 years later, from maybe about a year, one to 1.5 years later, after the first event in Mount Sinai, between 1 to 1.5 years later. So they arrived at the doorstep of Canaan. So they reached a place called Kadesh Barnea. And so what happened is that they sent some 12 spies to the land of Canaan. And then, so the spies went and explored the land for some 40 days. And then they report that it is really a land with very rich and wealthy, rich and and fertile agricultural, land that has large chunks of grapes that they brought back. But then they also report some really large and powerful people, and they're very well fortified cities. And they discourage the Israelites from going in and attacking them. So basically, the people rebel against God and rebel against Moses, okay? And then all the Israelites were grumbling against Moses and Aaron, and they talk about choosing another leader that would take them back to Egypt. So, and then the whole assembly was talking about stoning Aaron and Moses. So, God responded to this rebellion, saying, "How long do these people treating me with contempt and refuse to believe?" And then he said, "I'll strike them down and with a plague and destroy them." So here at this this instance, God was once again threatening to destroy his people. But then Moses once again interceded for the people. So once again, he reminded God of his character and his reputation, and he asked God to forgive the sin of these people. So eventually, God relented and forgave his people, but then he delayed the people entry into the Canaanite promised land for a total of 40 years. Okay, so all the people over 20, and counted in census and who grumble, they will die in the desert and will not enter the land. So, and the 10 spies was struck down and they died of a plague. So these are the two incidents that Moses recorded in his first sermon to the Israelites. Now, we know that Deuteronomy is composed of like 3 major addresses of Moses to these people. So the chapter 1 to chapter 4 is the first address that Moses gave. And then we will maybe touch briefly about the second and the third address of Moses a little bit later. So this is a general overview of the 40-year history of what happened to the Israelites. But most of the stories happens in the first 1.5 years after they left Egypt, and then after 30 years, another half year that when they actually start driving into the land of Canaan. They defeat the Amorite kings. Okay, so any questions or discussion or points that you want to discuss or questions? Anything?
Yeah. What's so unusual is that your handout here is so helpful. It reminds us that they got to the brink of Canaan relatively quickly.
Right. Yeah, within 1.5 years. Yeah.
And then we talk about the wanderings, but the wanderings, that was 95%. It wasn't getting to the land of Canaan.
Right. Yeah. In book of Deuteronomy, and maybe only one verse talks about, described at 38 years. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I never really thought about it until I looked into the history some more. You can kind of Google timeline of Exodus. You'll find some pretty good information about people actually. I mean, this is just an abbreviated version of what I saw in that chart. they actually put in every little details that you, and then with all the Bible verse. Any others?
Yeah, but it's what's interesting is that their arrival at Canaan was not the culmination of the 40 years. I mean, it was the second time around, but initially they got there.
Right, yeah.
And then
they could have gone in right there.
Yeah.
Right? They could have gone in right there 1.5 years, 2 years, and they'll be in possession of the land. So because of their like disbelief, then it kind of dragged on for another some 38 years, and it was so a lot of those people were very sorry. Eventually they tried to go up and fight them, but God was not with them at the time. Yes.
We often think about their rebellion and how they didn't trust the Lord and had fear, and they ended up wandering around for 38 more years or 40 years total. But today I was thinking about some of myself or other people that like, okay, well, you're not making it happen for me. I'm going to go make it happen for myself in so many ways.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking, okay, they had the pillar of the fire and everything to guide them.
Right.
But how many people today would say, heck with this, we're going to go, we know where it's at. We were there just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Let's go find our way back and try to do it ourselves.
Right.
And so they did have an element of faith in just being able to follow around in this, wilderness that probably wasn't so fun. So I do believe there was faith. It just wasn't enough at that time.
Thank you. Okay. Any others? Oh, they're over there. Yeah.
It's very interesting that the two rebellions, how God, Moses, and how God's interaction with Moses. The first one, as you mentioned, they danced around the golden calf, and God was going to destroy them. And then Moses says, "You can't do this, Lord. You will be misunderstood. Your reputation of a loving God, forgiving, will be misunderstood, and people will see you as a vindictive and God that'll give the wrong message." And so Moses again at Kadesh Barnea does the same thing.
Have the same problem.
He's intermediating between God and the people. He says, "You can't do this, God."
Right.
They just misunderstand your character of love and how you forgive and love. You can't be seen as a severe, vindictive God. And he says here, right here in verse, let me see where it's at. Verse 18 on Numbers 14. "The Lord is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children, and to the third and fourth generation. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you've also forgiven this people from Egypt until now." So God's love even extended twice the rebellion he forgave. And what's amazing about this, God doesn't clear the guilty. They did reap the consequences of their rebellion, but he forgave, and he was a loving, kind Lord. When he forgave, he was more interested in reconciling them than punishing them and killing them.
Right.
And they're perishing in the way because of this rebellious people. But he was more interested, as he is with us, reconciling us and loving us and forgiving us and bringing us into fellowship with him, and restoring us.
Right. Thank you for bringing up that point that I was trying to read that passage about God's character. And that is exactly a good passage. And that because the whole, experience of Exodus is about God's character and how God try to save his people. Now, we are going to go to a different part of the discussion. Many talk about the Amorites people, which is in our lesson. And I want to write down several, let's see. Several Bible passage. Okay. Deuteronomy 2:34 to 35. Deuteronomy 3 verse 6, 7, and then Joshua 6, 20 to 21. And then 1 Samuel 15, 2 to 3. Okay, if you can find them, if you find this text, maybe you can, someone read it for me really quick. Anyone? Okay, first Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 34 to 35.
Okay.
Do you have the microphone?
I have it right here.
Okay,
So,
Go
ahead.
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. At that time, we took all his towns and completely destroyed them, men, women, and children. We left no survivors. But the livestock and the plunder from the towns we had captured, we carried off for ourselves.
Okay, next, Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 6 to 7.
we utterly destroyed them, as we did to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men and women and children of every city. But all the animals and the spoil of the cities we took for our booty.
Okay, Joshua chapter 6, verse 20 to 21. Okay, go ahead.
Joel?
Okay, Joshua 6, 20 and 21. So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets. And it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. Then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword.
Okay, the last one, 1 Samuel chapter 15, 2-3, verse 2 and 3.
Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey.
Okay, well, we've read four of this text, and it seems like give us an impression that the Bible was kind of full of violence, right? All these people were destroyed, and then even women and children. So, it kind of raise a very difficult questions. Is this genocide? Okay. Any people, any such comments on that?
We find these difficult passages. We find them in, the flood.
Right.
All the people perished.
Good.
They were given opportunity to accept the light. They rejected it. And the consequences of the rejection was the earth was filled with darkness, violence, and their thoughts were continuously evil. These people that occupied these lands were of a similar nature, from my understanding. They were, idolaters. They were practicing wickedness in their hearts, and they were in rebellion against God, and they were refusing to accept the truth that came from Egypt and God's miraculous deliverance of His children. and they're often refusing to let them pass through, to not take from them, but to let them pass, and they refuse at times to do that. So, and then there's this concept of if they were to continue to dwell alongside them, then it would corrupt the children of Israel, and they would lose their holy light and presence because they would compromise, and those practices would become, the darkness would overtake them. So for those reasons, we don't quite understand all these kinds of things, but they're there, and they're difficult passages.
Yes, we understand. We don't really know all the details, so we can only place our trust in God, and that God is doing what is right. But we don't have a lot of this passage. We don't really have a good explanation, and we just have to put our trust in God. Now talking about the Amorites, okay, the Amorites were descendants of Canaan, who was one of the son of Ham. Okay, that was in Genesis chapter 10, verse 15. So now when God make his covenant with Abraham, that is in Genesis chapter 15, God promised Abraham that he would give you this land to take possession of it. Okay, that was in verse 7. And then this, however, will not happen immediately at the time of Abraham. So Abraham's descendants will be enslaved in a foreign land for some 400 years. And then after that, they will come back. And then can someone read Genesis chapter 15, verse 16? Genesis chapter 15, verse 16.
Yeah, 15:16.
Yeah, chapter 15, verse 16.
But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
So for the NIV, it says, for the sin of the Amorite has not yet reached its full measure. Okay, this is how I wrote down the NIV. Okay, so the Amorites were already mentioned during Abraham's covenant with God, God's covenant with. So, but then it says that their sin has not reached its full measure, or come to the forefront. But then in a few chapters later, we read about the story of the Sodom and Gomorrah. So it looks like that the sin of the Sodom and Gomorrah has kind of reached its full measure. So that was why God destroyed the city-state of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, actually, I tried to find out where Sodom is and Gomorrah is. From what I can see in what I read is that they were located to the northeast part of the Dead Sea, which I believe is to the east of the Jordan River. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tent near Sodom. So Lot was the one who kind of lived there. Okay, there's in actually Genesis chapter 13, verse 11 to 13. Okay, so Lot chose him, for that. He was kind of dividing the land between himself and Abraham. So Lot chose to live near the city of Sodom in the plains of the Jordan. Okay, so the man was at that time it said that the man of Sodom was wicked, sinning greatly against the law. On verse 13, the Lord told Abraham about the great outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. There's in chapter 18, verse 20. So we know that the city of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. But then what happened was that Lot became the father of the Moabites and the Ammonites. He kind of followed like an incestuous relationship with his two daughters. So this is like at the time of Abraham, okay? So now we move forward a little bit to the time of Jacob. That would be in Genesis chapter 34, about the story of Dinah and Shechem. Remember, who is Dinah and Shechem? In Genesis chapter 34, verse 2, Shechem was actually the son of Hamor the Hivite, okay? One of 7 Canaanite nations or people mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. So Shechem and Hamor, they were like, well, you can call them Amorites, but they were, more specifically, they were from a Hivite, Hivite. So after Shechem raped Dinah, described as a disgraceful thing in Israel, in verse 7. So we know that Simeon and Levi attacked the unsuspecting city, killing Hamor, Shechem, and every male in the city. So, but that was not exactly the same as the sin have reached a full measure. So because at that time Jacob actually disapproved of his son's actions and condemned them. So the sin of the Amorite had not reached its full measure at the time of Jacob. Okay, so now the next thing we come to would be the Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay, so we are very familiar with the 10 plagues against the Egyptians and the destruction of the Pharaoh's armies in the Red Sea. These are very well known to us. However, these stories were also very well known to the Canaanites. So I would like you to turn to the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verse 8 to 11. That was the story of Rahab. Okay, so Joshua chapter 2, verse 8 to 11. Can you read it? Go ahead.
Now before they laid down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know the Lord has given you the land. That which is the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is a God in heaven above and on the earth beneath.
Okay, thank you. So this is Rahab talking to the spies who were at her house, right? So, but basically, Rahab said that she was aware of what the Lord did to the Egyptians, that was like 40 years ago. And not only that, but they also heard about what they did to the 2 Amorite kings, which is maybe just more immediate, just maybe 6 months ago, okay? So Rahab were aware of Rahab and most likely her, the people in the city of Jericho would, that means the people of Canaan were aware of what God had, done for the Israelites, back 40 years ago when they were in Egypt, and more closely, more immediate to the 2 Amorite kings that they did. So both like remote and more recent events, they were familiar with it. Now, another Bible text is Joshua chapter 9, verse 9 to 10. Now, this is talking about the Gibeonites, the Gibeonites who actually went to lie to Joshua. So, chapter 9, verse 9 to 10. Go ahead.
And they said unto him, Joshua, from a very far country thy servants have come because of the name of the Lord thy God. For we have heard of his fame and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were beyond Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon, and to Og king of Bashan, which was at Ashtaroth.
Right. Okay. So what do you find? The Gibeonites, just briefly, they were basically Canaanites, but they were, when they hear the Israelites are coming, they were very afraid. So they went to Joshua, but they lied to them. They said that they were from a distant place, which is not true. But they also mentioned about their knowledge about what God did, to the Egyptians, the Pharaoh, and then more recently due to the 2 Amorite kings. So now, despite the dubious background of these 2 people, okay, Rahab, who is a kind of like a positive, and the Gibeonites, who are like liars, okay, both Rahab and Gibeonites, they lie, okay. They are like a dubious background, but then neither Rahab or her family nor the Gibeonites were destroyed when Joshua marched into the territory. So basically, yeah, we can see that. So we know the point. Now we can establish the point that the Canaanites actually know. They have a 40-year warning of that the Israelites are coming, and then so they have 40 years of advance warning, and if they like Rahab and like the Gibeonites come to try to make peace with the Israelites, I'm sure that they will be allowed to live alongside the Israelites. So the last point I would like to talk about would be later. One of the important themes in the book of Deuteronomy is about blessings and curses. Has to do with the covenant, God's covenant. God's covenant with the Israelite people, a lot of it has to do with blessings and curse. But then we can actually go back to the original call of Abraham by God. So because it also talks about blessing and curse. Now let us go back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 2-3. That was the Abraham's call by God. Okay, Genesis 12, chapter verse 2-3. Well, actually, we have a short time. Let me just keep going, okay? I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great. So the first point is about Abraham, okay? And then the second point is that you will be a blessing, and all people on earth will be blessed through you, okay? Is Abraham as a blessing. And then the third point is that I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curse you, I will curse. So blessing and curse is also a theme in the original call of Abraham, okay? So if you're talking about blessing and curse, the first story you'll come to will be Balak and Balaam, the king of Moab. We don't have time to talk about it. But then we talk about the Amorite king in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan. Now both of these kings would not allow the Israelites to pass through their territories. Instead, the armies marched out to fight the Israelites. So with God's help, Israel defeated and destroyed and dispersed them. And then after they passed the Jordan River, Joshua went on to defeat and kill the 5 Amorite kings. That is recorded in Joshua chapter 10. Okay, so now I do want to read a couple more passage in book of Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4-5. Okay, and this talks about the wickedness of the Amorites. So it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4-5. And Moses singled out child sacrifice as especially detestable to God. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 30-31. So the blessing and curses in the book of Deuteronomy is now applied to the Israelites. Now back in Abraham, it would apply, the blessing and curse applied to other people. But in Deuteronomy, the blessing and curse is applied to the Israelites. So blessing and curse were important motives in God's covenant with his people. So in Moses' third sermon in Deuteronomy chapter 28, describe a long list of blessing, verse 1-14, but an even longer list of curses from verse 15-68. So the Canaanites and Amorites were facing God's judgment at the time of the conquest, and the Israelite, and then there was a time that Israel, received their land. However, the book of Deuteronomy say that the lesson is that if the Israelites become disobedient and unfaithful to God, they would meet the same fate as the Canaanites and Amorites before them. So that would be the main point of the book of Deuteronomy. So the three main points that from this, it would be, the first point would be about the wickedness of the people there. The second point is that they were giving quite plenty of advance warning, right, for over 40 years. And then the third main point is that the Israelites themselves would also face judgment if they, disobedient and become unfaithful to God, worshiping other gods. So that would be the end of my lessons today. Thank you.